distribution of one environmental burden at a time. And the reason we only looked at one thing at a time is because the data for doing these kind of analyses just didn't exist in the beginning. So many researchers had to pull the data sets together to do the research in the early days. And it wasn't until the mid 2010s where we started to have the opportunity to have access to data sets where multiple environmental burdens were measured and made available publicly. I think the very first example of this was when California created its CalEnviroScreen environmental justice and cumulative impact assessment tool back in 2013. They collected environmental data and social vulnerability data on a number of characteristics. And then that was the first, by the way, first state level environmental justice screening tool. And it's been the model for a lot of other states, including here in Michigan, where our tool is called My EJ Screen, but it's very much modeled after CalEnviroScreen. But it wasn't until 2015 when the EPA created the first national data set called EJ Screen, where we had initially 11 indicators of environmental burden that covered the whole U.S. and the U.S. territories. And since its inception in 2015, EPA was updating the database. The last time it was updated, it had 13 environmental indicators in it. And as many of you know, it was EJ Screen was available until February of 2025, at which point the new administration pulled it from its websites. But even so, a lot of organizations have preserved the data, so they're still available, but they're not being updated or made available through the federal government at the moment. So one of the opportunities this provided, I think there's been a lot of suspicion, if you will, that it's not just one or two environmental burdens that affect people of color communities and other vulnerable populations. There's been a strong suspicion that multiple burdens impact communities, socially vulnerable communities at the same time. But until recently, until these data sets came along, we didn't have a means of actually measuring this. So I worked with Charles Lee, who some of you may know. Charles was the principal author of Toxic Waste and Race in the United States, which came out in 1987. It really was the report that was the life changer for me and got me interested in this issue. And Charles was the director of the Office of Environmental Justice and the senior policy advisor for the Office of Environmental Justice for a long time as well. So he and I worked on this paper together. And what we did was, when we were thinking about the concentration of multiple environmental burdens, we thought that there has to be at least two things that are affecting the concentration of environmental burdens in communities. One is the magnitude or intensity of individual burdens, and then the number or count of burdens that reach and exceed some specified threshold. And these are two ideas that, again, they haven't been implemented until recently. So our thinking is that the more environmental burden you have, and the more intense the burden is, the more of those burdens reach some minimum threshold. I think it's logical to assume that the potential harm also increases along with that. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have data to show the exact harms for each one of the EJ Screen environmental burden indicators. But what we can show is how the cumulative environmental burden is associated where vulnerable populations are concentrated. So let me show you the results of the study that we did. And this is, to me, it's more than just an academic exercise, because by understanding these relationships, there's also a lot of potential to build decision-making tools or improve on the ones that are already out there. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So let me first give you some description of EPA's EJ Screen database. The last time it was updated, they were tracking 13 environmental burdens, and you can see on this list what some of them are. I think some of them are pretty self-explanatory: PM 2.5, ozone, diesel PM, estimated cancer risk from toxic air, respiratory risk from toxic air, toxic releases to air from industrial sources that report to the TRI, and others. So one of the first things that we did was we looked at how each of those 13 indicators are distributed, and then we wanted to see how the concentration of vulnerable populations changed as the concentration or magnitude, the intensity of those environmental burdens increased. So I'm going to use diesel PM as an example. So this is one of the 13 environmental burden indicators, as you see here. And essentially what I did here was to sort all the 85,000, somewhere around that neighborhood, 85,000 census tracts in the 50 states and Puerto Rico, based on the diesel PM concentration, which is measured in micrograms per cubic meter, and sorting the census tracts from with the smallest value to the highest. You see, you get a curve, that's some will call exponential, which means as you're going from the smallest or smaller values to the higher values, the values are increasing at an accelerating rate. And I found that for all 13 of these EJ Screen environmental burdens, the distributions are exponential. And then, as you can see, I marked off 2 points on the curve, one at the 50th percentile, or the median. The median value is 0.22. Now, what that means is that half the census tracts in the U.S. and Puerto Rico, the diesel PM concentration is 0.22 or less. And then the other half of the census tracts in the U.S. have values that are greater than 0.22. And what's important about that median value is anything that's above the median is disproportionate. So I get the question asked a lot, well, what's disproportionate? Well, if you know what the median values are of whatever environmental burden you're studying or interested in, if the value for a census tract is above the median, then it's being disproportionately burdened. Now, the other thing I marked off is 90th percentile value, which was 0.48 micrograms per cubic meter. And what's important about that point is I found for 12 out of the 13 environmental burdens, they all reach an inflection point. You get a hockey stick effect at the 90th percentile or higher. So I was very interested in that outcome. They all have all but one have a hockey stick. So the next thing I did was then looked at, as you're going up the curve, how does the concentration of vulnerable populations change? And to make the analysis manageable, I divided the distribution into deciles, and then looked at the concentration of, say, people of color at each of the deciles as you're going up the curve. So I'll show you the outcome of that. I combined the first 5 deciles from 0 to 50% because anything at 50% or higher is not disproportionate. I was specifically interested in the range that was disproportionate. So if we look at, for example, the percent of people of color, these represent the concentration of people of color as you're moving up that curve. So this light blue bar at the left extreme represents all the census tracts in the 0 to 50th percentile. And then each bar after that represents the next 10%. So the orange bar represents the 50 to 60, the gray 60 to 70, and so on, until you get to the green, which represents 90 percentile and higher. And you can see how how dramatically the concentration of people of color goes up as you're moving up that curve. So when you're at the 50th percentile or less, it's only about 20%. And you have to forgive me, I can't have to put my glasses on. It's about 29%. But once you get up to the 90th percentile and higher, the average percentage of people of color is over 60%. And you can see the similar patterns when you look at the percent with low incomes. And I'm sorry, I can't read the slide because of the size here, but you can see that for all the other socioeconomic indicators, you see a similar pattern, although they're not quite as dramatic. So I looked at all 13 environmental burden indicators in EJ Screen and found similar results. Now here are 4 of the air pollution concentration indicators, like diesel PM and particulate matter and ozone, and toxic releases to the air from industrial facilities that report to the toxic release inventory. You see that there's an inflection point at the 90th percentile. Here are 4 examples of the other indicators, which I call proximity indicators. Proximity to Superfund sites, proximity to hazardous waste facilities, proximity to resource management planning facilities, and so on. And you can see a similar pattern where you get this hockey stick at the 90th percentile, and you get this exponential distribution. And I did for these indicators in all 13, I looked at the concentration of vulnerable populations as I'm moving up the curves by decile. And you see pretty much the same patterns as I showed you for diesel PM. There's some variation, but the patterns are essentially the same. Here are some of the results for the air pollution concentration indicators, and then here are another 4 example of the proximity to hazardous sites indicators. And again, you see similar patterns. The bottom line is, as you're moving up the intensity curve, as the intensity, the magnitude of any one of those 13 indicators gets bigger, so does the concentration of vulnerable populations, and it's especially so for people of color. Okay, the next thing we did in this analysis was to then look to see what happens when you count the number of environmental burdens that exceed some specified intensity threshold. So I started with the 50th percentile, because again, 50th percentile, anything above that is disproportionate, and below that it's not. And so you'll see a count that goes from 0 to 13. And that simply literally means, if you're looking at a census tract in the US, how many burdens are there where, say, if the count is 1, where there's at least one burden that exceeds the 50th percentile. And then you can count all the way up to 13 and look at all the census tracts where for all 13 the burden exceeds the 50th percentile. And what I show here is that, again, as that count increases from 0 to 13, I'll look again for people of color, the concentration keeps going up all the way from somewhere, I guess, around 18% to almost 70%. You can see what a dramatic increase that is. Now, for the other social vulnerability indicators, the results aren't quite as dramatic. But what I found was, whenever you go past the median count, the concentration of vulnerable populations go up. And what's the median count? Well, the median count means that for half the census tracts in the U.S. and Puerto Rico, the count is 6 or less in terms of the number of burdens exceeding the 50th percentile. And the other half, the count is greater than 6. So when for people of color, you see this really dramatic change, just dramatic increase throughout the range. But for the other indicators, you see that there's an increase whenever you pass the median count. In this case, it's 6. And then I raised the intensity level, and you see this is the 60th percentile now, and you see the same pattern, but all these bars are getting higher because you put a more demanding criteria on what you're looking for. You're just looking for those tracks where the burdens have reached or exceeded the 60% percentile or higher. And you see the shapes of these distributions is similar to what you saw before, but all these bars are getting higher. Here's the 70th percentile, same thing, same patterns, except the bars are getting higher. Here's the 80th percentile. The highest count here is 11. There aren't tracks that have a count higher when you raise the intensity threshold to the 80th percentile. And here are the results when you raise the intensity threshold to the 90th percentile. And here the maximum number is 9. So let me put this together in another way to show you the pattern. So this.
Hey, Dr. Mohat, no, sorry to interrupt you, but I was just going to ask if you could try within, because we started a little bit late and we have our other speakers waiting, if you could kind of start to sum it up in the next 2 minutes about kind of what the data means. I think that's the direction you're going in.
Okay, yeah. Let me. I'm almost to the end. Let me try to do that. Let me just concentrate then on the people of color. Basically, what I did is I combined the two ideas. Each line represents an increasingly higher intensity threshold. This is the 50th percentile, and the next line is the 60th. The gray line is the 70th. The yellow is 80. The dark blue is 90. And then each dot on the line represents a count. As the intensity levels get higher, and as the number of burdens reaching those intensity thresholds are exceeded, the concentration of people of color just keeps going up and up. And a similar pattern when you're looking at the percent with limited English. And for income, it's the same pattern, although things are squished together a little more. So let me skip over to the final thing I want to say, and that is we now have several decision-making tools. CalEnviroScreen, that tool is used to determine which communities qualify for special funding. The Council on Environmental Quality's CGS tool, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening tool, had a similar purpose, try to identify disadvantaged communities that qualify for special funding. And New Jersey's is perhaps, I think, the most, one of the most recent and also groundbreaking tools is that they track 26 environmental stressors. And then if the number, they call that the combined stressor total, if that number exceeds the median count for the state or the county in whichever the community is located, then the state is required to make a company applying for a new permit to either modify the permit so the net burden doesn't increase, or the state is required to reject the company's permit to put in a new source. So this is the last slide I just want to show you. I did a similar analysis where there's a median count for the state and the county, for every county in New Jersey, and the maximum that can ever be, the maximum median count for all the counties in the state is 13. And so if the count for any block group exceeds the count of adverse stressors exceeds 13, then the state is required to either requires the company to put a condition or to modify what their plan, or the state is required to reject the permit. But as you can see, what I did here too was to see, well, what happens if you keep counting the number of adverse stressors, and you see 3 different indicators of social vulnerability. The low-income population keeps increasing as that count gets greater, past that maximum count. And same thing with people of color, and the same thing with those with limited English. And I think that's important because this tells us that this tool does find what New Jersey is intending it to do. But how about if we want to locate communities that are especially bad off, and maybe we want to prioritize them for even more funding which is what the Justice 40 initiative intended to do, or to prioritize actions that would help to reduce the burdens in the community. So I'll stop there, Kareem. So I'll turn things back to you then.
No, thank you, Dr. Mohai, and just much appreciation to you for the studies that you've done. And I think there's a lot of questions. There's a lot more that we can unpack from the data here. We'd love to have you, if you're possibly able to stick around in a few minutes. We could maybe come back for some Q&A. But for what you've shared thus far, let's give Dr. Mohai a round of applause. And so, Dr. Mohai, we're going to move forward, but if you can stick around, we'll try to come back to you in about another maybe 25 minutes or so after our panel.
That sounds great.
We can open it up for some Q&A. So thanks again. And we'll make sure to share Dr. Mohai's report with everyone here in the room after the event. So with that said, we're going to transition. All right, so I want to bring on two other experts in this space who are here to join us this evening and provide some additional context around this large environmental justice issue. I want to welcome two partners who I've had the opportunity to meet in the last year or so who are doing amazing work at a national level in this space. Tyson, Christine, can you both hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All
yes.
right. Thank you both for joining us. Thanks for your patience. We started a few minutes late, but glad to have you all a part of the conversation to provide some additional context around specifically the J.H. Campbell plant, but what this means at a broader kind of national level. And so with that said, I want to go ahead and kick us off. If we could, before we jump into the questions, I'll allow you both just to do a very brief introduction about who you are and how your work is directly connected to this conversation today. So Tyson, if you could go first.
Yeah, so first, my apologies that I can't join you all in person. I'm in Washington, D.C. I direct the energy program with Public Citizen, which is a national consumer advocacy and public interest organization. And I had the real honor of meeting Kareem last year at an NAACP event in Memphis, Tennessee, to talk about data centers and the harmful impact on communities. And so just really honored to be here with you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tyson. Christine.
Hi, folks, and thank you so much, Kareem. Really appreciate being invited to speak today. My name is Christine Powell. I'm a deputy managing attorney in the Clean Energy Program at Earth Justice, which is a public interest law firm. The team of folks that I work with focus on the energy transition and making sure that it's implemented in a way that redresses equity and environmental justice issues. And I'm based in San Francisco. I had the honor of working with Kareem on a really critical rulemaking at FERC last year having to do with transmission assets. And I'm, again, really glad to be here today and talk to you about the Campbell litigation.
Thank you both, and an honor to have you both a part of this conversation. We often in this space use a lot of acronyms and there's a lot of jargon, but I want to share with you all that we have real community members here in the room. And so I want you all to be as authentic and real as possible and really, sharing your remarks today. And so thank you both again. With that, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with our first question. And so we'll allow you both to kind of jump in and address this first question. And so these federal decisions are being described as technical adjustments, market corrections, or reliability emergencies. From your perspective, what is really driving what we are seeing and what is truly at stake, particularly for Black communities and other overburdened communities, as you all know, that have already faced disproportionate health and environmental impacts when these protections are weakened or coal plants are kept online? Either of you can start. What's your thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. So first, I just need to be really clear and direct that we're dealing with a lawless, unconstitutional administration. The Trump administration is engaging in widespread abuses of not just human rights and decency, but of law and the Constitution. And on energy, the phony declaration of an energy emergency that is being used to revive coal-fired power plants that have no business being in operation is a 100% political move. There is no policy merit. There is no reliability merit. There is no consumer benefit. The only benefit here is for the Trump administration to bestow financial favors on industries that it promotes, that it favors, at the expense of clean energy technologies. We all know how dirty and polluting coal is to communities, to depriving us of health, but it is also the most expensive energy resource. So this is a meritless, unhinged administration that is pursuing. I've been working in DC for 30 years. I've seen an awful lot. This is far and away the most radical and dangerous administration that we've ever dealt with. And the emergency order on Campbell is just one example of total incoherence and just poorly managed energy policy by this administration.
Thanks for that, Tyson. Before we go over to Christine, I want you to keep that at the forefront, as I'm sure there are other examples that we can share with the audience as well. But thanks for that answer. Christine, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that, the hypocrisy here is just, off the charts. On the one hand, they're saying we need these fossil plants for reliability, which they don't. But nevertheless, let's run with that for a little bit. Let's say they did need it for reliability. They're also blocking other projects like wind and solar, particularly offshore wind, from moving forward, even when the project's already built and consumers are paying for these projects and rates. So it's totally hypocritical. It makes no sense. As Tyson mentioned, it's just purely to prop up the fossil industry. And, as we've spoke about earlier, a lot of the fossil infrastructure is disproportionately sited in Black and brown neighborhoods. And so keeping them on disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities. And, it's really awful. And, we need to stand up against it, basically.
Thanks, Christine. I think that's a perfect segue into our next question. And we'll let you start with this one, Christine. Can you walk us through the current lawsuit that was filed in response to the DOE's emergency order? What's being challenged and what's at stake legally?
Sure. I'd like to just first level set. As Kareem mentioned, we're talking about the Campbell plant that's located in West Olive, Michigan. It's owned by Consumers Energy. Consumers was scheduled to close the plant down last May, but days before that was supposed to happen, DOE issued an emergency order compelling consumers to keep the plant running. And they used a statutory provision that is referred to as Section 202C of the Federal Power Act. The problem with this is that act only permits the Department of Energy to require a plant to keep running if there's an imminent, certain, and expected shortfall of overall energy in the area, such that they need the plant to stay online to cover any energy demands. And, that's not what DOE asserted. DOE basically asserted that sometime in the future, where the plant is located, obviously in Michigan, which is a part of a larger service territory referred to as a mid-continent ISO, because at some point in the future, that whole territory might have a shortfall that this plant needs to keep running. And that's just simply inconsistent with what the statute allows the Department of Energy to do. The Campbell plant was scheduled to shut down pursuant to the settlement agreement. So, like I said, DOE issued the order, and then several environmental advocates challenged the order. So they sought rehearing and then petitioned DOE's order at the DC Circuit for review. Now, these orders expire every 90 days. So we have to challenge them every 90 days and then add that challenge to our overall appellate petition, which we have been doing.
Thanks for that background. Tyson, did you have anything to share as it relates to that last question?
Just, Public Citizen has been a party in these proceedings. Just really grateful for the legal expertise of Christine and her team at Earth Justice, which just does a tremendous job representing the interests of the public interest and protecting the environment. So another thing just to add to Christine's outstanding overview is that this Campbell unit is extremely expensive to operate. And the latest filing with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Consumers Energy, which, as much as we might dislike Consumers Energy as a utility, they did not push for this. They didn't even know that the Trump administration was doing this. They were out of the loop. But now that they're in the loop, they have formally requested to recover from consumers over $42 million to keep this dirty old plant in operation. This is an abuse of ratepayer funds. There are so many lower cost resources that do not contaminate our lungs and our soil and our air that are available to dispatch in Michigan that the Trump administration is ignoring because it has a radical, unhinged energy agenda.
Thanks for that, Tyson. I think continuing down that thread, well, let's talk a little bit about household cost impact. And so I think the number you just shared was 42 million. Let's continue down that line. When coal plants like Jay's Campbell plant are kept open beyond its planned retirement, what does that typically mean for household energy costs and ratepayers, especially those in lower income and historically overburdened communities?
Yeah, if you've got a decades old plant that you have been primed for retiring, you're no longer doing preventative maintenance. You have canceled all of your coal orders. And then all of a sudden the Trump administration says, hey, we are ordering you to remain online. So now you've got to order more coal primarily on the spot market instead of a long-term negotiated rate, which is a terrible way to manage energy. Again, the Trump administration is the worst administration I've ever seen on energy policy. These guys have no idea what they're doing because they're motivated by greed, by insider deals, and by ideology rather than common sense. This facility is extremely old. They deferred a ton of maintenance on it. So it needs a lot of work to become more efficient, which they're not able to do. So this thing is just going to continue to add costs on working families' utility bills at the exact time when so many of us are struggling to make ends meet, to pay for our utility bills. The Trump inflation is real. We have seen rising energy costs under this administration because they have terrible energy policy because of their bailouts of the Campbell unit.
Thanks, Tyson. I want to recognize something you shared as well. You know, consumers' energy, as you touched on, really, to be clear, has been somewhat on the right side of justice as it relates to this issue, right? So by no means is this about consumers. Obviously, we have a long ways to go in terms of consumers making a full transition to renewables and supporting the community in the way that we see fit. But this initiative is specifically pointed toward the federal administration in this false emergency. So
100%, Kareem. This was 100% the Trump administration's call. Consumers was notified about 24 hours before the Trump administration issued the order to force the Campbell unit online. So consumers, in their defense, was not at fault in this.
For sure. Thanks, Tyson. Let's keep going. Christine, I want to next talk a little bit about we'll go back to the litigation and a little bit more background on the timeline. So when we look at the timeline, From the years of the Clean Air Act violations and a planned retirement to the May 2025 DOE emergency order, the summer 2025 legal challenge, and the August extension that has brought us to today. And just for everyone in the room, this current extension is scheduled to expire tomorrow. And so that we strategically hosted today's event on purpose ahead of this current extension. And so my question for you, Christine, if you could give us an update on where the lawsuit currently stands and what impact could the court's decision have on what happens after tomorrow's deadline?
Yes, thanks, Kareem. So as I mentioned, the orders expire in 90 days, and as you just said, and so we're going to add, we're going to challenge, the next order that comes out. We'll have to add it to our appellate petition. And the current schedule, at least for the first Campbell order, has us arguing the case in May, which is really critical. We need to get in front of the DC Circuit before the summer, because then we won't be able to argue until after the summer, which means they won't decide until 2027. So we're really trying to get a decision this year because we think we're going to win and we want the Campbell plant to be closed down. So we're really shooting for that May oral argument at the DC Circuit. Now, because there are so many renewals, that kind of pushes back the date in our litigation. And so now DOJ is trying to consolidate our cases and then push out the oral argument date. We're currently fighting that. As of now, though, DOJ, the Department of Justice, apologies for the acronyms, the Department of Justice. Now, we are fighting the Department of Energy, but the way it works legally is the Department of Justice, they basically represent the DOE in these matters. They're their lawyers, essentially. And so they're still scheduled to submit their brief on the 24th, but like I said, they're trying to delay, they're using a bunch of delay tactics to get that oral argument date to move. And so, we're fighting against that. We want a decision by the fall so that we can get the plant closed. And I will say, in terms of what's at stake and the impact, as was mentioned before, shutting down the Campbell plant was decided pursuant to a settlement agreement with a number of folks, including Tyson's group, the state, consumers, advocates like yourselves. And, you came up with a really smart plan to shut down the plant, and consumers has their own resource plan that you all pay for, right? The ratepayers you pay for, consumers, purchasing power in the near and short term, in the short term and long term. And so by, making this plant run, regardless of that agreement, basically the federal government is ignoring the wishes of the state of Michigan, the folks who fighted for the settlement, as well as costing consumers extra money, right? As Tyson mentioned. So that's really impact. And then, of course, more importantly, the environmental hazards that come along with running this plant unnecessarily.
We kind of started off today's, thank you, Christine. We started off our session today with a little bit more background on the historical environmental impacts from a recent study from Dr. Paul Mohai at University of Michigan. And so it's not just the cost side of this, but the health impacts. And sometimes that's hard to measure long term. I want to, Tyson, if you have any reflection to that last question, but I want to also transition us to talk a little bit more about grid reliability. Before I do so, did you have any remarks, or are we okay with keep going?
Christine, as always, summarized it fantastically. So,
all right. Thanks, Tyson. So this next question, I think, is extremely important. So a big part of this narrative that's being pushed right now is that the extending of the fossil fuel operations protects grid reliability. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't add another layer of context to the conversation when we talk about the ongoing conversation around data centers, which is a big conversation across the country. But Tyson, since our visit to Memphis last year, has become much more of a heightened conversation here in Michigan. And so I want us to keep that as a part of the context as well. But from your expertise in energy markets, where is the data to support that current argument, if at all? And let's take it a little bit further and talk a little bit more about who ultimately bears the risk if that framing proves inaccurate.
To keep the lights on and to keep energy affordable, you need to have dynamic, efficient generation units. There is not a single coal-fired power plant that is dynamic or efficient because they are old, they are extremely inefficient in the way that they generate electricity. You're just shoveling rocks, which is what coal is, into a boiler to heat up water, to generate steam, to run a turbine that will generate electricity. Coal is the most inefficient resource that we have on the grid. And whereas 15, 20 years ago, it supplied around 50% of our power, it's now down to 14%. And that's because it's been eclipsed by the energy revolution that we have seen in technology that is driving costs down if we allow them a bigger role in the grid. And Kareem, as you said, and as Christine said, we can no longer tolerate energy resources that contaminate and pollute our communities. When a coal-fired power plant was built in 1950 or whatever year it was built in, we may not have fully understood, or maybe we ignored the massive health impacts that burning coal has. We can no longer afford to ignore those health impacts, and we can no longer afford the expensive electricity that comes from burning coal. So no, there are no reliability advantages to keeping old, decrepit, inefficient generation resources. What the Trump administration doing right now is illegal, it's unconstitutional, and it's against every tenet of efficiently operating energy markets. Because the people that we have in charge in Washington, D.C., I'm just going to be extremely honest with you. They are supremely unqualified. They are focused more on providing favors to their friends and allies than they are to the broader public interest. And they are seeking to end the clean energy transition simply because it is identified with their Democratic predecessors in President Obama and President Biden. That is really all this is. This is bringing the culture wars into energy. And so what we need to do, Christine and Earth Justice is doing a great job. Public Citizen, we're working with a ton of other organizations on this. We're proud to continue to partner with the NAACP. We just need to fight the Trump administration at every single turn. And we're going to be able to undo this ridiculous order on Campbell. It's going to take a little time, but we've got all the facts and the laws on our side.
Thanks, Tyson. Christine, I want to jump back to you, and then I want us to have a few minutes for if there's any questions from the audience. So we may jump ahead a few questions, but this next question, I want to go back to some of the legal foundation around this issue. Not sure if everybody's familiar, but this has just been one of many of the current administration's efforts to slow down our transition to renewable energy. One that has recently been a big part of the conversation is around the endangerment findings. And so if you could talk a little bit more about what's happening there with the endangerment findings, but specifically when they're weakened or repealed, how does that reshape the legal landscape?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll just...
No, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, sorry. I had a little bit of a delay over here. Yeah, essentially what the Trump administration has done is assert that the federal government doesn't need to regulate or for various reasons can't regulate greenhouse gas emissions, right? Which we know are the critical factor that's heating our earth, right? And causing all kinds of other issues for communities. Excuse me. And so right now, what the Friday's order directly impacts the EPA's ability to regulate emissions from vehicles, which is also very critical, obviously, because transportation accounts for, I believe, most of the greenhouse gas emissions that pollutes our planet right now. And so in the short term, not to get too in the weeds, but, 2026 vehicle models were already built on the older standards. So the real concern is, in the upcoming years, and hopefully states can step in, as states have been doing since this administration taken over. States have been stepping up to protect their constituents, and hopefully that's what can happen here. There are a bit of wrinkles in terms of preemption, but the states can get creative, and I think we're going to see a lot of that. Blue states getting creative with how they regulate emissions to protect the public health and welfare. So that's kind of, excuse me, kind of how we're seeing it shape out. Earth Justice is definitely going to be at the forefront, challenging this order on many grounds. It does not appear to be lawful, which is not a surprise with this administration. But it still is really unfortunate. And, the endangerment finding is also the underpinning for allowing the federal government to regulate emissions from power plants, right? Which is incredibly important. And so at the moment, I believe that is still intact, but, that's probably step 2, right, in their plan. So.
Thanks for that, Christine. I got just one or two more questions, but Tyson, if there's anything else you wanted to add to the endangerment findings piece.
I mean, the science has been abundantly clear for decades now that every single scientific assessment has found that when we burn fossil fuels like oil, coal, and natural gas at an accelerated rate, it emits significant amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that have profound and harmful impacts on the global climate. That scientific assessment is irrefutable. But like so many other things with this administration, they don't care about facts. They don't care about science. They don't care about common sense. This is a radical, unhinged, fascist, dangerous regime. I'm just going to be very blunt here. And we need to fight with everything we've got to uphold our republic and common decency from the Trump administration. So the endangerment finding is just yet another clear example of how radical and dangerous the Trump administration is to human decency and human health and to protecting our communities.
Thanks, Tyson. Yeah, let's give that a round of applause. For sure. So I'm going to go with one more question for you all, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And after the Q&A, we'll allow you all to kind of have some closing remarks. But my last question before we transition to Q&A from the audience, this brings us back to, Tyson, something that you touched on earlier around the role of the utility companies, right? And so let's talk a little bit more. We have our partners here in the room from Michigan United who are going to talk a little bit more about this after the panel. But what role, in your eyes, from your expertise, do utility companies and corporate influence play in shaping these outcomes, right? Keyword, corporate influence, right? And how should communities like ours think about long-term structural accountability?
That's a great question. And again, I'm so sorry that I can't join you in person. I've got a young family and I wasn't able to travel, but I hope to visit your community soon. So 75% of the electric utilities that provide our electricity in this country are owned by companies. And it's really important that we understand that those companies, they are called public utilities because federal law says that the business of selling electricity for consumption by the public is inherently affected with a public interest. That's why consumers and other utilities are called public utilities, because they are providing an essential public service. And we all know that when the temperatures drop or when it gets really hot, access to electricity becomes a human right. That when we do not have electricity in our homes, it becomes a life or death issue, especially if we have elderly parents, people with health conditions, or young children. And so a utility cannot just operate to maximize profits for its shareholders. It must prioritize affordable, reliable service to household consumers. And that's a tension that is sometimes very difficult to bridge, that tension between delivering investment value to shareholders while maintaining a reliable and affordable energy system. We hope that we can bridge that tension with corporate utility partners that will prioritize affordable and reliable service. Sometimes we cannot, and I think there should be options on the table for municipally owned or community owned utility systems that can help ensure that electricity as a human right can be delivered affordably and reliably.
Thanks, Tyson. Christine, did you have anything there before we go to the audience for a few questions?
Yeah, in terms of the role that utilities can play.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the orders, there's a recent another 202C order for a plant in Washington, right? And no, sorry. Well, yeah, there was one in Washington, but also in Colorado over the Craig unit. And there, Tri-State, the utility, sought rehearing at the Department of Energy, which was great. I think the utilities need to step up and speak up and say, hey, I've got this. We have planned our system well. We know we know how to make sure that rates are just and reasonable while keeping the lights on. We're working with our communities. We have a stakeholder process where we've got this. And that's what Tri-State has done directly to in response to the Department of Energy's order. And I think we need to see more companies do that, like really step up and own that they've got a process that's sufficient. And, and so that's what I'd recommend that they do. Just follow Tri-State's example.
All right. Thank you both. Now we're going to open it up to the audience for a few questions. We're going to allow a few folks to ask some questions. So if we're going to hope you all can hear us well. We're going to try to navigate this, but just raise your hand if you have any questions. We have one here. Let us know, Tyson and Christine, if you have any problems.
Has there ever been a study done on the number of people that have died of cancer due to the coal industry?
Did you all hear her?
Yeah, the number of people who have died from cancer due to the coal industry.
Yes, and if there's any studies to support that.
I'll let you know that everybody that I grew up with on the west side, from Division to the railroad tracks, going down that hill, everybody, if they are not already gone, they have had cancer.
Yeah. Any studies that you all can think? I know the answer to that is yes, but are there any that stand out that you all would share as it relates to cancer disparity?
I mean, I don't know any off the top of my head, and I'm not a public health medical expert, but when you burn coal, you are burning arsenic, mercury, and other extraordinarily toxic chemicals that are going directly into the atmosphere and coming down on the communities that surround that plant. That's indisputable. There's a reason why we have been pushing to close down coal-fired power plants, because they have an abysmal health record. And for the Trump administration to come in with no consultation with the local community, with no justification that stands any sort of legal or common sense test, the Campbell unit does not need to operate to keep the lights on in your area of Michigan. And for the Trump administration to do that is an affront to the local community that has borne the brunt of the health impacts from this facility. And we're going to continue fighting with Earth Justice and the entire coalition until the Trump administration is defeated. But this is, I mean, we are fighting the Trump administration on every single front because this is a lawless, harmful regime. And our republic is going to persevere. I'm confident. But we need to stand together and continue to fight because, as the speaker said, we've lost loved ones. We cannot lose more loved ones to this lawless regime and their pollution agenda.
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks for sharing that. Christine, did you have any follow-up before we go to our next question? Okay.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I would just add, in addition to the pollution, which is just terrible and the worst, probably of all the other generating plants, the coal ash that it produces, it's a toxic substance that never goes away. Okay. And, you know, the procedures to store it cost billions, very expensive to regulate and to keep the coal ash from contaminating groundwater. So like basically the harms to our health don't stop at the pollution. It continues on forever and we pay for it essentially.
Thanks, Christine. We got another question from the audience here. If you could just share your name and maybe organization with your question.
Hi, Dan Schoonmaker, local Grand Rapids resident. I think this question is for Earth Justice and is both for the litigation surrounding the Campbell plant, but also what I expect would be some pending litigation around the engagement finding. What I'm curious about is kind of the current legal ecosystem and atmosphere. If there's any concerns about filing suits that, if they make it to the Supreme Court, are probably going to create anti-environment precedent, and you know what potential ramifications that would be. Because in the case of the engagement finding, we're had a fairly it had a 2007 decision that was pro-environment. How soon things would roll in the court if that could do more harm than good?
Did y'all hear his question?
Yeah, it's a great question. Basically, you know, we're seeking to challenge these really horrible decisions in court, but we all recognize that SCOTUS is kind of captured in the moment, right? And so it's kind of, will we create even worse precedent for ourselves if we challenge these matters? And it's a great question, and we're certainly thinking about it, but you know, going after the endangerment finding is just so core to like the climate, the climate legal framework that we have. It's kind of like, if you don't go after that, I don't know what else we're going to do, right? I mean, it's just a really quintessential piece of our climate defense. And so there are some challenges and we're going to have to navigate that. But I think that on balance, it's worth it to kind of put ourselves out there and challenge it because it's such a core weapon really to fight climate. And as Tyson mentioned earlier, there's just such a tremendous amount of evidence that greenhouse gas emissions are just really horrible for the environment, for our health and all that. And it's just gotten, the evidence has just gotten more convincing, really. So the evidence is just better and better. And so we also think that we have a really good legal argument there.
I would just add to Christine's excellent comments and observations that we're seeing at the district court level a number of really eloquent and forceful orders from federal judges where their audience is you, the American people, because they know that we have a Supreme Court. And again, I'm just going to speak very freely and frankly with you. We have a Supreme Court that is, I think, more radical than the Trump administration and has no adherence to the Constitution, to precedent, to law. Their adherence is to supporting Donald Trump. And what we're seeing at the federal level below the Supreme Court is brave judges sticking their necks out and writing incredibly thoughtful, eloquent orders to let the American people know that facts still matter. And I do think that, and again, I have never been extremely political in my career, but the current administration has forced me to become more political. That when a Democrat comes back into the White House, the first order of business has to be dismantling the Supreme Court, because this is not a court that has any interest in fairness, in law, nothing. There's nothing that is grounded in the Constitution with the current Supreme Court. And it is actually a danger. John Roberts is exposing exactly who he is, which is he has a radical, horrendous view of where America should be. And I think the people in the room and the people that I'm proud to work with, we do not share that vision. We share a vision of love, of community, and of standing together. And that's what we're going to continue to do here. And we will prevail.
Yes. I know we're a bit over time, but I want to express sincere appreciation for myself and everyone in the room, Tyson and Christine, for your words tonight, and your leadership in this space. Again, I value the partnership from both of you as individuals and your organizations, and look forward to continuing the hard work with you all. So let's give them another round of applause.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be, with that, we'll be in touch soon. Thank you both.
Okay.
Thank
thanks.
you.
Take care, folks.